Welcome back, everybody. Tuesday, June 9th. I actually had to check the calendar. John Aravosis here with Cliff Schechter, and we are happy. Hey, guys. And we're happy to have David Frum with us again. David is a staff writer at The Atlantic. He is also the author of the new book, Trump. You know, I knew I was going to... I saw somebody else on TV having a hard time interviewing David, and I was like, "Is it?" Well,
I did let the P go. Trumpocracy. That's how you do it.
Okay.
Trumpocalypse.
Okay. Can I break the fourth wall and go get a copy of the book and put it in front of
Sure.
Yes, because we just screwed it up. So
I just screwed it up. So Trumpocalypse, Restoring American Democracy. So we are back with David Frum. I was going to say David Trump. That would have been kind of weird. The author of Trumpocalypse, Restoring America's Democracy. By the way, I was watching something on TV or something in the news the other day, and a Frum has something to do with the Orthodox Jews?
Yes. In Yiddish and Hebrew, mostly Yiddish, Frum means to be super pious in the same way that the German word fromm means pious. Huh. Although I've always had a feeling that in my family that the name Frum was applied to us because we were probably the village drunkards, and it was applied sort of sardonically.
Oh, yeah, the Frum.
Look, it's the Frums again with too much vodka.
Yes, but so Frum. So I get reproached for this because I'm not very
because you're not very pious.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's the best of us, David.
I was going to say that seems to be a theme in your life, though. So getting back to that, no. So there have been some articles and people complaining, and I'm not quite sure why, but they've been freaking out that the Never Trumpers are all going to get Biden cabinet appointments or something.
Yeah, I'm holding out for a trade representative, actually, but
that's where you can really get the money.
Exactly. No, the whole thing I think that when people say things like that, it's just a tell because it's a moment. There's a French saying: "Who accuses others, who accuses others reveals himself." And I think there's but my favorite of this is I'm often told that I do or say things because I want to go to cocktail parties, and well, you know me. I mean, I hate going out. The cocktail party is the punishment. The reward is never going to a cocktail party. I mean, I like having people at my house, but I hate going out. So,
the tell though is usually the people who say that desperately wish that they were going to the cocktail parties. Well, not always, but often, I would say.
Also, the Georgetown cocktail party was a thing in the 50s and 60s. Right. It is now one of Washington's less happening neighborhoods. But no one ever says, you're looking forward to going to those Logan Circle cocktail parties. Although that's if there are good cocktail parties happening anywhere in Washington, it's certainly east of 16th Street, not in Georgetown.
Yep.
We're going to hang out at Kay Graham's place again, and yeah.
No, but I thought it was.
It is. It's like something out of what was the movie? Oh come on! It's like a more recent movie. It was about the publishing of the
Washington Post,
the
Pentagon Papers, or the
Pentagon Papers. What was the movie? I can't think of the name. Where they're all going to. It makes you think of that era. In any case, go ahead.
Well, I think actually that we could have a funny conversation about the social history of Washington because. Look, Washington in the 60s was legendary for its almost total absence of good restaurants. And so the reason that people went to cocktail parties was that the only way you could cope with the food was by being hysterically drunk by 6:30 p.m. And then things didn't look so bad. Also, people really did drink a lot in those days in a way they don't now.
But, 60s for sure. I mean, that was the 2 or 3 martini lunch? Yeah.
Yeah. And that I think one of the things that it is so weird. I mean, because I assumed like many people that Hillary Clinton would win in 2016, and I had this whole sort of plan for my post. I had books I was going to write. I had things I was going to do, and my plan for the Biden administration. So I turned 60 in June. Our youngest child goes off to college. We'll be empty nesters.
She thinks she does.
Okay. Ow. So my plan for the Biden administration is I'm taking my wife to India for 3 months, and then I'm coming back here and writing books on 19th century economic history. That's my plan for the Biden.
And those are really popular at the cocktail parties, I hear.
Wait a minute. Frum's coming. He's going to tell us about 19th century economic history. Everybody duck.
Run. It's that Frum guy, the religious one with the 19th century economics. Run.
Well, and I'll give people the background and then we'll move on. But basically, Byron York, who's pretty much a troll at, what is he? Where is he at? He's got to be at the Federalist, but he's not, is he?
He's at the DC
Daily Wire or one of those crazy.
I've known Byron I've known Byron for a long time. He at his best, he has been an excellent reporter.
Yeah.
And he may be one of those people who's ill-served by Twitter. But he has capacities.
I think he's ill-served by Trump in general because he seems to me to be one of those people I took seriously as someone I disagreed with, but whose opinion I valued 5 years ago. And now I don't, because it seems like he takes the Trump line on everything.
Yeah.
But again.
In any case.
The era we're in.
He had written something talking about how all the never-Trumpers, all you liberals are going to be surprised when all these never-Trumpers are trying to get cabinet positions and go to cocktail parties. And we were like, Byron, and what David just said, that says more about you than people like David, because the never-Trumpers that I know aren't in this for personal gain. Quite the contrary. I mean, as I've always said too, like I left the Republican Party. I'd be a lot richer if I stayed in the Republican Party 30 years ago. Like that's not why they're doing this.
Well, and this is this is an argument that's said on the farther left, and in this case, with a little bit more substance to it, because they're talking at least about something real. So there's a review of Trumpocalypse, the book I just wrote in the New Republic, and the reviewer was very worried. Not that I personally was going to be international trade representative, but that people who thought like me were going to have a lot of influence over the Biden administration.
Right.
And the answer is that's going to be true, not because of me, but because the secret of the election that is about to happen is that it's not that Democrats are going to move from winning 87% of the vote in the Bay Area to 97% of the vote in the Bay Area, and that's going to matter. What's going to matter in 2020 is the same thing that mattered in 2018, which is that the Democrats are going to do well in suburban Houston. They're going to do well in suburban Atlanta. They're going to do well in suburban Charlotte. They're going to flip states probably like North Carolina, and that the party
where I live right here in northern Kentucky, which was like Republican forever. I'm in Cincinnati. That's how we have a Democratic governor in Bashir in northern.
Covington, where the Covington boys came from, that was going to be like a big culture war, bloody shirt, and Covington voted Democrat in 2018.
That's correct. That whole area,
And Covington is like one of the, as you know, is one of the most affluent areas in the greater Cincinnati metroplex. And it's full of people with college degrees and women who, think they're paying enough property tax, but cannot abide the Trump presidency. And so the party you get is a function of the people you elect. And when you elect a lot of people from the suburbs, which is how Democrats win, you also get people who are rather more conservative leaning than you do when the Democratic Party is electing people only from the Bay Area and, greater New York.
Makes sense. I mean, Joe Manchin is not, Jackie Spire.
Right. So it is, I think the Bernie Sanders people have a true premonition that the magnitude of the Democratic win that is shaping up in 2020 is going to end up drowning a lot of the influence they would have when it was a smaller party. And I think one of the big arguments between left and center in politics is always, would you rather have 100% control of a losing party or a 20% voice in a winning party? And one of the things that separates left from center is the left thinks it's more important to control the party, and the center tends to think it's more important to control the country.
Well, and this is, what you're basically describing is what happened in 2018, right? Where you had a lot of, centrist Democrats, I'm not sure what term one wants to use, but more moderate Dems elected and very few liberal Dems. And it already started the discussion with, I don't want to say the Sanders crowd, I don't want to really typecast them, but you could say the social justice, the AOC crowd or whatever. It already started a bit of a battle because it was like, well, are you really in control of the party, or do you really represent the whole party when, 80% or 90% of the people who just got elected were centrists? And even more so, like you said, if we end up taking back the Senate, and the White House, a lot of the people I guess that's the question for you and Cliff. So what you're saying is a lot of the people that get elected, if we hold on to the House and maybe even expand, if we win the Senate, that a lot of the people that are going to get elected are not going to be necessarily the left.
Can I say something quickly, John? And I want you to, because I want you to expand upon it, David, and maybe answer this too. But my feeling also is maybe we generalize a little too much when we just say the left and the center. Because again, there's the center. Absolutely. I think of someone like I mentioned Joe Manchin, and there's folks like that.
True.
There's the Bernie left. And then there's in between that, what I would call liberals, which is where I would put myself more, right? I still do think David's argument overall holds weight because we're winning a lot more folks who are center left, centrist, center right in suburban areas. And they're going to want representation in the Democratic Party. So I do think that overall is true, but I also want to be clear. I don't think it just separates down to, Bernie folks and centrists.
Well, and of course it's more complicated because Black America in some ways is left and in many other ways is
Great
not.
Point.
It's very complicated. But I dedicated Trumpocalypse to the conservatives.
You look like Mueller there, looking at your Cliff Notes, David. Okay. Don't know your own.
I just want to make sure I got. I want to make sure I said it exactly right. But I dedicated it to the conservatives, Republicans, and libertarians of Never Trump. And I quoted an old hymn: "When all were false, I found thee true." So for the first 2 years of the Trump presidency, that the pro-Trump Republicans would jeer at those of us who are anti-Trump with a joke that often went something like, "Never Trump, you're not a political party, you're a dinner party." And then what happened? What happened in 2018? What happened in 2018 was George H.W. Bush's former district in Houston, near River Oaks, one of the most affluent area, I think, in Houston, Texas 7. H.W. Bush won it in 1966. It stayed Republican through Watergate continuously to 2018. That district went Democratic in 2018. Eric Cantor's former district, just west and north of Richmond, that went Democratic in 2018. Newt Gingrich's former district, Georgia 6, went Democratic. In fact, as almost all the Atlanta suburbs did. In fact, out to the Second Ring Highway. Here in the D.C. area, Virginia 10, which is got to be one of the most affluent districts in the country, if not the most affluent district in the country. And it's been Republican for 60 of the past 66 years. That went Democratic. In all of those cases, by the way, the winner was a woman. And in Georgia 6, a Black woman. So there's something afoot. But, when Nancy Pelosi is looking at her caucus, that she understands that Abigail Spanberger, who is the woman who won what was Eric Cantor's district.
My name is Abigail Spanberger. I loved her. Yeah.
Former so she's a former
CIA, I believe, right?
CIA officer, and she's representing the affluent suburbs of Richmond. She's not going to be for abolishing police forces. And so if that's your dream of what you want the Democratic Party to be, then, you're going to find a lot of these people, frightening or menacing, or offensive in some way. But that's not because of me and the Never Trump Republicans. That's because of the logic of party competition in a two-party system.
Right.
Let's shift over to your book then. So what is I don't want to say the premise of your book, but what is your book about?
Okay, so the book was written on the assumption that Donald Trump was almost certainly going to lose. And it was written that way in 2018, 2019, which is when most of the work on the book was done. Then I was able to revise it just before the pandemic when my sense that he was probably going to lose became a conviction that he was almost certainly going to lose. And so the question that the book tries to grapple with is, but after he loses, the social forces that brought him to power, they're not going anywhere. And I think we've tended to exaggerate how powerful they are. They're not 42 or 44% of the country, but they probably are 30% of the country. What do you do about that? And so the book is a series of ideas about how first you try to win them back to democratic politics.
This feels like the Iraq police force that we're trying to figure out what to do with them after we fire them.
Well, I don't want to exaggerate the analogy, but what I spent a lot of the Trump years doing was reading the history of Germany from 1945.
Okay, I was just going to say just that, like, right, what do you do once we get rid of the bad guys, but the whole population is still made up of bad guys?
It's complicated. This I don't want to go down a tangent here, but Americans read obsessively about the history of Germany and its worst period. But I've always been fascinated. How do you build a democratic culture when you didn't have one before? How do you deal with people who are compromised with bad activities? And I'm not making any comparison, obviously, the magnitude of what went wrong, but how do you rebuild a democratic culture? And so that's what the book is about. How do you rebuild a democratic culture? How do you address social divisions? And then how also do you be realistic? There are people who can't be won over. So how do you minimize their ability to do harm? Because right now, the most illiberal, most repressive forces in American life have hugely disproportionate political power. How do you make their power less obtrusive, bring it back in line with their actual numbers?
Right. I mean, again, I'm sure you cover some of these arguments in your book, David. The thing that I and John can tell you, go off on a tangent on the show a lot about, that we've never sort of had an answer for is, you can look at, people say Nazi Germany. I'd like to say something even more recent. You look at Rwanda and what occurred there, right? And we just caught, what's his name, Kabula in near Paris. What did he do? He purchased talk radio and disseminated the sort of cockroaches. Hutus are the good folks. Tutsis are cockroaches. Killed them versus talk radio. And I guess the thing is, part of the erosion of our democratic culture can absolutely be traced to what goes on right-wing talk radio, Fox News, the sort of mainstreaming of othering, of the kind of rhetoric of essentially encouraging, almost inciting violence and conspiracy. Let's be quite honest. Mm-hmm. How do we get back to a place where we have, because democracy is based on, we don't want to all fight in the streets. We want to sit down and come to a compromise based upon a core set of beliefs. So you don't always get 100% of what you want, but we're not shooting each other. How do we get back to that when there are people that literally in this 30% plus are being fed a daily diet of things that just aren't true, and sort of this kind of rhetoric?
Well, let's begin by being realistic about the magnitude of the problem, because one of the things that we have going for us, and that the civil disturbances of 2020 really drive this point home, is this is a much more peaceful country than it used to be. And one of the ways that what is happening in 2020 is not like 1968. We still don't have an exact idea of how many people have been hurt or killed during these commotions. And there's some dispute because sometimes a gun goes off in the vicinity of a rally or a protest or a riot. And the question is that sort of like ordinary crime completely unrelated to the event, or is that somehow, but altogether, even on the broadest definition, since May 25th, as we speak here on June the 9th, there are not more than 10 people, police and non-police, who have been killed since in any remote connection. So in 1968, just in the city of Washington, there were 13 people killed. And neighborhoods were burned out that didn't recover for 30 years. The damage in Washington has been a bunch of windows broken in downtown D.C., one bank badly vandalized. I took pictures of it. And then a lot of graffiti on monuments. And no one should do any of those things. Right. And especially do not put graffiti on the monuments, because that's not just damage, that's also a symbolic act of contempt for the institutions of the country. Bad. But graffiti comes off, windows can be repaired, and smashed up ATM machines can be replaced. And that we just and what we have been seeing, and I'll speak especially to DC, since the 1st of June, that the events have become more and more peaceful, more and more orderly. Now, I've been in the center of these events probably 5 times for a couple of hours at a time since the 1st of June. And by this weekend, the whole thing was looking like the DuPont Circle farmers market. I mean, it was the same people who go to the DuPont Circle. There's strollers everywhere, puppies. It was really, really orderly and good-humored. And that's a sign. We're not that country. And so that what I worry about is not that, and the people who consume Fox, I mean, not to be mean about this, but
be mean.
They're going to, before you go massacre people, you have to lift yourself up out of the chair. And
I had a feeling that's where you were headed. Yeah.
and there's a certain period in life when just getting to the fridge becomes already as much excitement as.
Is that why you think so many of them are anti-kneeling, because most of them can't kneel at all? Sorry, go ahead. I'm being mean.
Now they can still vote, and so what I worry about is the political harm. So one of the Trumpocalypse is full of ideas about how do you, without doing anything, without constitutional amendments or anything, really unlikely. How do you bring the American political system more into line with the country as it is? And then how do you address some of the social divides between rural and urban, between the more affluent and the less affluent, between men and women, that have created, I think, a kind of polarized political culture, even if we have so much less violence than we did in 1968.
Okay, so David, here is what my question really is. Part of what needs to be done once Trump is out of power is figuring out how we stop future Trumps from doing what he did. All the things in the system that we did not realize were basically gentlemen's agreements based on comity, right? That we all just agreed the president wouldn't tweet crazy-ass conspiracy theories from Russians who work for the Kremlin like he did this morning, right? I mean, how do you, so that's the first question is, how do we set up better systems that stop the president from extorting the Ukrainian, president for his own election? But the second question I've got, which is a trickier one, and I think it's especially tricky for Biden because of who Biden is, but also what Biden will inherit if he wins, a messed up economy and a pandemic, and now the racial strife. Should we not hold these individual men and women accountable who did this?
Yeah.
Or do we have to reconcile because that's the way you move on?
Okay. My instinct is for the people, you're going to need the broadest possible form of reconciliation. And look, there are people, the Trump family is heading for a world of trouble, not only legal, but also financial, business. And I think they will be plunged into the thickets after the Trump presidency comes to an end. So many of the people around Trump were so mediocre or so dishonest that only Trump lofted them into public view. And after Trump, they will sink into the obscurity they deserve. I mean, Sebastian Gorka will be a podcaster for the rest of his life, not to disrespect podcasters, but he's not going than death. He is not going to be exercising political power ever again. That's not going to happen. I don't think you have to worry about him. And I think some of the people are going to remain. I mean, Bill Barr probably doesn't have much of a future, but many of the people who did things during the Trump years is Tom Cotton going to stay important? Tom Cotton is going to stay important. You have to find some way to live in the country with Tom Cotton and minimize his ability to do harm, and maybe even incentivize him to be a better Tom Cotton. Yes, but he's not going anywhere, and it would be meaningless to hold him to account. What I really worry about most, and I talk about this a lot in the book, is we got in the habit of using these words norms during the Trump years to mean the things that were not written down that we thought were rules, but when you press them, they turn out not to be rules. And I think the fate of norms, once they're broken, once people realize why there is nothing stopping the president from running a business while he's president, one of two things, either the norms have to be formalized into proper law, and they have to be written down. I think that'll be, that's true for the tax returns norm. That has to be turned into law. And not just for the president himself, but for the president's family. Presidents always have bad relatives. But there's always a Billy Carter. But in the past, that it was a small enough deal that we could sort of count on, and we could count on the respectability of the good brother or the good president to control the greedier members of the family. I think we now need to formalize this and say that anybody in the president's family who accepts Secret Service protection also has to disclose their tax returns. If you want to vanish, you want to be a totally private citizen, great, but then you don't get the Secret Service protection. You have to keep a low profile. If you want the nimbus of power and prestige that comes from Secret Service, disclose your tax returns so we can follow what you're doing. Other norms, I think, are going to stop being norms and are going to have to become politics and be litigated. And let me give an example of this, that we've always had this contested, how far can Congress subpoena? And Trump's taken the position, I will comply with subpoenas from the Republican Senate, but I will not comply with subpoenas from the Democratic House. If Biden becomes president and he says, okay, I will comply with subpoenas, he's establishing a new rule. Democratic presidents comply with subpoenas, whether from the other party, but Republican presidents don't.
Right.
So you have to find some way to really enforce this upon, and I think there need to be some kind of, tests of political strength. And that will mean, I think, for example, continuing to litigate the Mazars case. This is a case about subpoenas that is going to the has been argued at the Supreme Court. It's supposed to be decided by the end of June, early July. I'm guessing the Supreme Court will try to punt it. And you have to keep at it, and you have to keep litigating this thing and get a Supreme Court ruling on the subpoena power, so that is binding even on future Republican presidents, and keep at it even after Trump goes and the issue seems to have become moot.
Let me ask you, here's another one that I've sort of been thinking about a lot. We've gone through this with Nixon, we've gone through this other times, but never to this extent where you brought up Bill Barr, where you've got an attorney general who literally is the president's lawyer. Yeah. When we had J. Edgar Hoover, abuse the power of the FBI director, we wanted to make that a less political position. We give these 10-year terms, right? FBI, CIA. I've often thought that the attorney general needs to head in the same direction. Yeah. In that, it's because it has to be very clear. This is not your lawyer. This is the country's lawyer, because it is your Secretary of State and is your Secretary of Treasury in the way that you pick them. So what are your thoughts on how we can...
But it wouldn't stop Bill Barr from being then a disaster for 6 more years.
But if his term may not have been... Somebody else might have been there when Trump came in, or his term might have been up when, in the middle. At least there's some potential check, is what I'm saying.
Trump fired Comey too, so keep in mind, it's the 10-year term is meaningless, maybe.
Yeah. So I talk about this a lot in the Department of Justice, because that was one of the institutions that failed most signally in the Trump years. So here's my suggestion about how you would approach that. I don't think it's in the nature of the American system that the attorney general can stop being a political appointee. Because remember, most of what the attorney general does is oversee civil rights, oversee commercial rules like antitrust. It definitely should be possible for a Republican president to say, I want laxer antitrust, and a Democratic president to say, I want stricter antitrust, and for them to make appointments that reflect that. It definitely should be possible for a Democratic president to say, I want to see much more activism from the Civil Rights Division, and a Republican president to say, I want to protect the rights of religious people and focus less on race issues. That's politics. So my suggestion is you can't do anything about the attorney general. But what you can do is say the assistant attorney general for the criminal division. That person should become a civil servant. And that is very easy to, you can that's just a matter of adjusting the schedules within the civil service. In no other democracy is the head of criminal prosecution a political person. The equivalent to the assistant attorney general for the criminal division in Britain is a civil servant. In Germany, a civil servant. In Germany, it's not, the chancellor has no say over that person. Their chief prosecutor is appointed by the Minister of Justice in consultation with the President of the German Republic, and the Minister of Justice usually belongs to a different party from the chancellor. The chancellor's completely cut out of it. And if a chancellor ever made suggestions to the director of public prosecutions about who to prosecute and not to prosecute, the chancellor would be arrested. So you can do this with the assistant attorney general for the criminal division. I also think that the 93 U.S. attorneys should become civil servants. But I think the attorney general can't be and shouldn't be, because remember, antitrust, civil rights, that's politics.
Aren't the inspectors general civil servants?
Well, the inspectors general are in a very complicated position, and there is not a good answer there. The inspectors general are in the executive branch, so they're appointed by the president.
Real quick, and I'm not just trying to detour to inspectors general. What I'm asking is, does civil servants really solve the problem if you have a president like Trump who doesn't abide by the gentleman's agreements?
Civil servants address the problem because it's very difficult to fire them. So they look. There are cowardly, time-serving civil servants. There are civil servants who are seeking appointments. You cannot make the system bulletproof.
No, right.
But what you can do is the United States allows a unique role for politics in criminal prosecution, and we have seen the consequences of that in the Trump years. And much.
So, David, not to give away your book, but I don't mean to. But who would then appoint those 93? Who do you, in other words, you're saying the way it's done in Germany, where the other party is part of the process. How would we do that and change the assistant attorney general here?
So you would rise through this. You would start as a prosecutor.
Okay.
And the reason it's hard again to do this is because the pay schedules. People aren't paid enough to stay long enough. I mean, there are a lot of things that it's a tricky problem, but as the reason people work in U.S. Attorney's office they work very hard for comparatively little money, is that they think if I do this for 5 years, I can then go join a law firm with enormous prestige. So, this is the most vexed and boring American problem, but civil service reform, where you need to have better people paid more, keep them longer, and then promote them through a hierarchy. And that has, not that that's a problem-free solution either. So you do well in your U.S. Attorney's office, you get to head it. You get to be the U.S. Attorney for one of there are 93 attorneys in 94 districts. And then one of them gets selected by the system to be the Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division. And that person is appointed by the president, but can only be fired for cause, and serves until that person retires.
I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, I think the whole point here is, as you're saying, we're just trying to make it better. There's no bulletproof, there's no perfect balance of powers in a democracy. It's sort of looking at the weaknesses that Trump has exploited and doing what we can to make them stronger. And so I hadn't thought about that. That's a really interesting.
And you need to bring back congressional oversight. I mean, the reason that J. Edgar Hoover was such a problem was in the Hoover years, there was no oversight by Congress over the intelligence services at all. And again, this is one of the things that has been a real problem in the Trump years, and I talked about, is the House and Senate intelligence committees, which oversee FBI, CIA, and NSC and other agencies, were created in the middle 1970s in reaction to not just Watergate, but the whole related
Church Committee and
all of that, and FBI above all, because the FBI behavior was the worst. And one of the things that emerged was, not only did Congress not know what the FBI and the CIA were doing, often the president did not know what the FBI and CIA were doing. And so they created these things. But the agencies have never liked this oversight because they think correctly that Congress people blab. And so they're always looking for ways out. And one of the harms done in the Trump years was that Devin Nunes is the perfect, if you're a CIA person who wants not to be overseen by Congress, Devin Nunes is a godsend. Because you can say, I think we should tell Congress less. They say, are you kidding? Remember the scandals of the 70s in the Church Committee? Yeah, well, remember Devin Nunes. Yeah, that's what happens when you tell Congress things. He goes and does these midnight raids. And so we need to, so Congress is the key oversight, and Congress has to be made to work better. And I have some suggestions of that, of which the two most actionable are get rid of the filibuster and make the District of Columbia or the residential areas of the District of Columbia a state. So we have 2 more senators from urban America and 2 more senators who are likely to be at least have a fighting chance of being non-white.
So you said District of Columbia. What was the other one you said?
And nuke the legislative filibuster. Just get rid of it.
I'm with you. What do you think about, I mean, if they want to, Puerto Rico as a state? I mean, certainly the way Puerto Rico has been treated by this president, I think that's less likely if you have people who are representatives who actually have any power.
I'm going to reveal my Canadianness here. I'm very nervous about Puerto Rico statehood. I think you need to become a state, you need not majority approval, but true consensus. You do not want to import a Catalonia or Quebec problem into the United States. And my reading of Puerto Rican opinion is you got about 55% of the population who want to be a state and 45% of the population who don't. I don't think that's enough. I think that's a formula for long-term.
I would agree. It has to be, public opinion has to be overwhelming. I think that's a smart way to look at it. Yeah.
What about
in DC? Everyone in DC wants to be in the United States.
Right, exactly. You guys are like the Vatican over there.
What about rescinding the memo that says the president can't be prosecuted?
I would
clearly
worry about
impeachment.
That.
Okay, but impeachment's broken too now, as we saw. So what do we do to put some kind of checks and balances back on the president?
I think that we're going to have to do that by making I think the president, we are going to have to just learn our lesson from the Trump years. The problem is, if we have two problems. If you make the president indictable and you keep the present system of prosecution, then the president is being indicted by his own appointees, and that's futile. If you go in the way I want to, which is to make the prosecutors less political, then you are resurrecting a J. Edgar Hoover problem, because then you have people who are not accountable immediately to any political person who have the power of criminal prosecution of the president. And I think the rule that the president can't be prosecuted during the president's service is broken. And the good news is, from this point of view, that American criminal laws are now so draconian that there are very few important laws that have statutes of limitation as short as 4 years. So that once the president is out, there's plenty of, if the president has committed tax fraud, has done other things wrong, then you can prosecute the president afterward, but only for unofficial acts. I mean, the idea that the president could, and one of the things that Trump
can we be
really
very
abused,
clear then? Go ahead. Let me let you finish, and I want to ask something. Sorry.
Trump is abused. One of the changes, I didn't write this in the book because I didn't think about this enough while I was working on it, is Trump tweets from the real Donald Trump account rather than the POTUS of the White House account. The president has a very large immunity against libel action for anything he does or says, anything he says in the context of his official duties. Is the real Donald Trump account in the context of the president's official duties? And I think, I don't write this in the book because I didn't think about this till after, that Twitter should say to Donald Trump, you know what, we don't want to police your speech at all, obviously. Right. But we're closing the real Donald Trump account.
Right. It should be the POTUS account that Obama had.
Exactly.
Yeah. You tweet as president, then we're very clear. No one can sue you for defamation. Right. You have then you're subject to the Presidential Records Act. You're subject to oversight by Congress. You get the immunity of the presidency with the responsibilities of the presidency. You don't get to be in this gray zone where we don't know who's talking.
Right.
The other thing I was going to say is I would hope, because this is unclear and we know Donald Trump drives right through those loopholes, is to make it quite clear that a president can't pardon themselves might be one of these changes we might want to look into. Because again, when you're talking about them being prosecuted after office, that's a problem if the guy's just going to pardon himself.
But that's constitutional interpretation, isn't it? There's nothing we can do other than the courts.
We can develop a pre-existing intellectual consensus. Just as whether the president can be indicted or not, that's that's just people following the logic of the Constitution. It's not written down anywhere. As Cliff said, it's just a memo. But it sort of follows logically that the system wouldn't allow it. Well, in the same way, it should follow logically. The point to the pardon power is to create, we all understand. I mean, anyone who's been a lawyer, it's a very blunt instrument. I mean, I keep warning friends of mine who have anything to do with it that people go to court looking for justice, and all they ever find there is law. So because of the imperfections of law, you want there to be some point in the system where somebody can say, this was just wrong. This person was convicted, was guilty, was convicted properly, but it just doesn't feel like justice what happened here. So you need a safety valve, but no one can do that for themselves. And so we just need an intellectual consensus. Self-pardon? No.
Hey, I've got a crazy question for both of you. Why did Nixon need to be pardoned at all? Granted, breaking into a building isn't necessarily, a presidential act, but who decides what is and isn't a presidential act in terms of what the president, what I mean?
Nixon had tax fraud problems. Nixon had taken some deductions on his personal papers.
Oh, you're kidding. So they got him on the, what was it?
Al Capone.
Well, it was pending, and it was one of those things that was unclear. And it wasn't that he'd broken the law exactly, but he had taken a very, very aggressive position on a tax deduction.
So it wasn't Watergate itself that he was pardoned for?
He was pardoned for
everything.
For everything. Just any federal offense you may have committed. Yes. And we're just going to, because there was this longstanding, and just to give you an idea of why Ford did the right thing. So it's 2020. and we still do not know whether Nixon ordered the Watergate break-in or not. All the memoirs have been published, all the historical documents, and we don't know whether he did it or not. So the idea that we would have achieved anything in 1975 by prosecuting Nixon for ordering the break-in. He did obstruct justice. That's what he was impeached and removed for. But you sort of for obstruction of justice, you want to send him to prison too.
Right.
Well, at least Nixon again there was a punishment there. He was going to be impeached, and so he left. And so it's different than where Trump. I mean, I guess you could call the fact that Trump was impeached, if not convicted, a punishment. But it still feels like obviously a lot more is needed.
It needs to be pending, and I think that what is going to the punishment that needs to come for him is that we don't relent on the subpoenas for his tax records, and that the very strong evidence that he committed tax fraud and bank fraud and multiple other frauds, a lot of things that he got away with because because of the deficiencies of the state of New York. That now they're so public that he's created situations where they can't be ignored, and that those will catch up with him.
David, should Joe Biden pardon Donald Trump?
No pardon without remorse.
Interesting. What define remorse in this case? What shape would remorse take?
Well, what normally has happened when presidents have used their pardon power personally, and by the way, remember, most presidential pardons are not personal. There's actually a bureaucracy inside the White House that exists to look for cases where someone's been punished disproportionately, or they've really. But the classic case is somebody did something bad, but in prison they have demonstrated that they really are a new person. They've taken on board what they've done. They've shown remorse. They've got 10 years of a 20 years prison sentence to serve. And you want to say, the person who did that person's gone, and we now have this new and much better person. And so the pardon process is mercy that is connected to some sense of the excessiveness of formal law. And so, I think one of the background to Ford's pardon to Nixon was Nixon in August of '74 was a visibly destroyed human being, and whatever he'd done, and even if he wasn't exactly sorry about it, you could just see that it had worked on him, that he had become a different person, and it was going to put the country through a trauma. In Donald Trump's case, you would be just rewarding impunity, and you would be in a situation like as happened with Michael Flynn, where Flynn professed remorse, promised to cooperate with law enforcement, got his deal, and then broke his word.
The reason I ask is, and I'm devil's advocate, so I'm going to take you off spotlight here. The reason I ask here, and I'm devil's advocating, is I guess you can't pardon state crimes anyway.
Right.
So because I was going to say, if the states go after Trump, you are going to have the problem of the country not coming together, right? We try to go after Trump and hold him accountable, or any of the people surrounding him, and that 30% is going to be in the streets, and it's not going to be Black Lives Matter. They're going to be destroying everything. These guys are nuts. But I don't worry. But I mean, I think.
But the things
go on, yeah.
The things he's in legal jeopardy for at the state level are things he did before he became president.
Right.
So,
they can't be pardoned anyway for it. So,
ProPublica had this. Yeah, the president can't do it, but ProPublica did this really interesting piece of research where they were able to get hold of some rent rolls of some of Trump's buildings, and they were able to get hold of some bank statements and some tax statements, and they were able to show that the rental income that Trump had declared to his bank was different from the rental income he had declared to the state.
I remember that, yeah.
And which leads to the conclusion he either lied to the bank, or he lied to the state, or possibly both. And there's really, a well-paid lawyer can perhaps devise an innocent explanation for those errors, but what it looks a lot like is tax fraud, bank fraud, or both. And but a private citizen and his corporation, that's not something that the president can do. It's not something the president should do. It's a little bit like what happened. Maybe the most relevant precedent here, the most immediate, is Clinton versus Paula Jones. Is after Clinton left the presidency, he admitted that he had lied to the court in the Paula Jones. Remember, Paula Jones originally sued Clinton for sexual harassment. That's how all of this started. And it looks like that was all true. He really did sexually harass her when he was governor, not president. And then he lied to the court about it. And he was disbarred. He suffered a sanction, and he paid nearly $1 million fine. And I don't think anyone who defended him during the impeachment thinks it's wrong that he was disbarred and that he paid $1 million fine for lying to the court about the course of a civil sexual harassment case where he was almost certainly guilty.
I guess what I'm saying, and I'm not arguing that Trump should be pardoned even by state governors, but what worries me is what comes next. State governor or state's attorney general try to hold Trump accountable for his crimes, even if their crimes not related to the presidency. And that 30%, including Fox News, is going to go batshit crazy. And we're back to where we are now. I mean, how do you bring people together, but at the same time hold people accountable? I said,
my concern is to bring them together to the extent that you can and minimize their ability to do harm to the extent that you cannot bring them together. So I think you have to be realistic about this, that you will reconcile. Of Trump's 42%, you will reconcile some, but there will be a hardcore, profoundly alienated people. And there it's important to minimize their ability to do harm. And part of that is by saying Trump is not going to have impunity. And remember I said earlier, I talked about how norms once broken, you either have to let them go or turn them into law. And so the norms Trump broke, we're going to be, some of them we're going to make new laws, but in other cases we're going to say, Democrats may have to play this game as rough as Republicans. And so I have a suggestion in the book about what you do about gerrymandering at the state level, which is assuming Democrats do well in 2020 and assuming, and there is of course a census in 2020, so there'll be a redistricting in 2021. I think it's crazy that politicians draw their own boundaries. And again, that doesn't happen in other democracies, but since it does, and given the terrible behavior of the Republicans after the census of 2010, my advice to Democrats is to, in the states that they control that are competitive states, North Carolina, for example, they produce two maps and say, here's the fair map, here's the harsh map. If we do that, we're prepared to do the fair map in North Carolina if you folks will do the fair map in Texas. If you do your map in Texas, we'll do our map in North Carolina, and try to restore some kind of deterrence in the absence of depoliticizing the drawing of boundaries, which is the ideal solution, but impossible.
Sort of mutually assured destruction, in a manner of speaking.
Well, that's what, by the way, used to happen before 2010. That the reason gerrymandering has become such a problem is Republicans had a huge year in 2010, won more control over state government than they had at any time since the 1920s, than either party had since the 1920s, and then proceeded to use that power at the same time as the Supreme Court was gutting the Voting Rights Act. Right. And the result was that you got whereas in the past, politicians were always, the national party always warned state parties, don't go too far. Because while you are drawing maps here in our states, they're drawing maps in their states, and let's observe some limits here. But after 2010, Republicans, we control everything. We control more. I think something like 2/3 of all seats of all the state legislative seats are Republican in the 2010s. So they went for the gusto.
Here's a question: is there anything to be done, or should anything be done about the vast number of right-wing, young, and completely unqualified people who've been put in as judges in various courts, or is this just something you think we have to live with?
There's an easy solution to that and a good one, which is the Supreme Court is a different matter. But the appellate, I unfortunately did not talk about this in the book because I was trying to keep it under a certain length. But the fact is there are not nearly enough appellate judges as it is. So I think there is no case against making the appellate courts 30% bigger. And there's absolutely work for them to do. And these are the federal courts, of course. State courts raise a different problem. And this is something that is not a topic of Trumpocalypse, but is a cause dear to my heart, which is, again, electing judges. That's crazy. Nobody else does that. That shouldn't happen. And states should try to move away from that. But that's not a national matter, unfortunately. But it's an insane system.
I've never understood. I mean, growing up in New York City, we elected a number of judges there. And now I live in Ohio, where we literally elect the Supreme Court, which is just utterly insane to me. So, yeah. I mean, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
In any case.
How are judicial races paid for? Well, the one question to anyone who is skeptical of this, I say, who is going to give money to elect or defeat a judge? Only people with business before the judge. No, no person who's concerned for good government is ever going to say, I really am concerned about the Court of Appeals here in Ohio and making sure that, So it's either going, and especially in the breakdown, that the system made sense in the days of stronger parties, where you say, you know what, the Democratic Party has picked 9 judges. The Republican Party has picked 9 judges. The Democratic Party, out of its Democratic war chest, is paying for its judges. The Republicans for theirs.
Right.
And the judges can then just be judges. And anyway, it's more about patronage than it is about ideology anyway. But that's not where we are now. Where these people are all freelancers. They all have to raise their own money, and of course, they raise it from the lawyers who argue in front of them, and that is, or the corporations who are sued before them. And that just it's inherently a problem.
Yeah, we have this. I'll say quickly. We have this ridiculous rule here where those running for office can't actually ask for the money, as if that solves the problem. So they just have an aide call, and you know what I mean. Like, so it's like their campaign manager has to do a lot more fundraising, but like they know who gave them money. It's ludicrous, and it doesn't solve anything.
Yes.
So, John, what do you got, my friend?
I mean, we're about to hit the hour mark here. I think we are hitting it, so we can set you free in a minute, David. But I'm still very concerned. I mean, obviously, we're all still very concerned, but I'm still very concerned about sort of culturally where we are. I just don't see how we bring the country together without it being what always seems to happen, which is the Democrat is supposed to come in and be the good guy, right? We're the ones that's not supposed to break all the rules, and we're the one that's supposed to have the Republican VP or whatever, the never Trumpers in the cabinet, whatever the idea is, but to try to reach across the aisle. And the next guy that comes in still learned Donald Trump's lesson, which is you can be a total jackass, break all the laws, but as long as you scare the hell out of Congress, they'll let you do it. And the Republican voters will, applaud you all the way. I guess I don't understand, how do we set up an incentive so that the next Donald Trump, who's even smarter than Donald Trump, Cliff and I talk about this all the time, doesn't get elected and do even worse, because Republican voters and the party say, yeah, we pulled it off once. Let's do it again with the smart guy next time.
Well, let me end with this conversation. This is the hope that ends both of these books, which is that I am hopeful, and I think there's some evidence for this. I won't predict it, but I think that the effect of the Trump presidency has been to open one of those moments of American moral reform that you get at roughly half-century intervals. And the last one we had was really the 1970s, where we changed, we have practical political institutional changes, but we also have a new spirit about things that are acceptable and not acceptable. And I think, the first round of this was the Me Too movement. And the second now is this second wave. Black Lives Matter, I guess, had its first wave in 2014, but now it's become a much broader kind of movement. And you see this when you go to the demos. I mean, this is now, the face of America. It's multiracial, it's multi-generational, it's very middle class. It's to the distress of some. It's a decreasingly radical movement. That's why the whole Biden just edited out the defund the police part from the beginning without cost to him. And the people who say defund the police say, well, we don't mean defund the police. We mean the following 17-point program. Well, if you didn't mean it.
I know we've
already had this conversation on this show, which is about branding and about you don't use, if you have to explain that what your meaning is the opposite of the word that you're using, then it's probably not the words you want to use.
But we are living through, I think one of the things that Trump did, and this is maybe the most hopeful thing we can say, is, human life, it's full of petty cruelties. And most of us become inured to those cruelties. It's just part of life. And especially if we're on the easy side of the cruelty, if you're a man reviewing the cruelties that are inflicted on women, if you're white, looking at the cruelties that are inflicted on blacks, if you're rich, looking at you know what? we just have to take, you people just have to take this all in stride. Can't you take a joke? And what Donald Trump did was he took cruelties and it was the fact he put them on the Jumbotron in Times Square. He's the president and he's mocking a man who was pushed to the ground by the police and bled from his head. And you can't now not see it or not think about it. You have to, it's unignorable. And once you can't ignore it, most of us will want to do something about it. Not everybody, but enough. And not necessarily with law. We just change our culture. And as we said, I mean, I am just struck again and again through the events of 2020, how much gentler a society the United States of 2020 is than the United States of 1970, how much less acceptable violence is. And maybe it's the cameras, maybe, who knows, but, we're more tolerant. We're more sexually egalitarian. We're more easygoing in a lot of ways. And,
more Canadian.
Well, maybe that's it. All the Canadians have come here. Brian Adams, David Frum. I mean, if you think about it.
I don't know. But there's less Southern is another way to put it. Less Southern. Maybe what it is the Civil War is slowly coming to an end. And I sometimes think about this with the monuments, that the price of reconciliation after the Civil War was to give the South its moral due, but in a lot of symbolic ways. And you say, you know what, the Civil War's over, you lost, we're not doing it your way, slavery's abolished, and the slave owners have lost a lot of money. But I'll tell you what, if you want to believe that your generals were braver than our generals, you're free to do so. If you want to believe that your fighting men were uniquely noble, you're free to do so. You believe that. And that was how the peace after the Civil War was built between 1890 and 1920. David Blight at Yale has a great book about this called Race and Reconciliation, which I recommend. And I think we're doing okay. There was another part of the Civil War. There were people who got sacrificed. That reconciliation between 1890 and 1920 was done at the expense of the Black population, then of the South, later of the whole country.
So isn't it a book where he begins with Woodrow Wilson and the 50-year?
Right.
I read it. I had to read it for my history PhD. Yeah. So where he starts, and Woodrow Wilson, of course, was as racist as they came, and it was sort of the acting as if there was nobility in the Great Lost Cause. Yeah.
Right. And that was the deal, right? We said, Abraham Lincoln was right and Jefferson Davis was wrong, but Robert E. Lee was more of a hero than Ulysses S. Grant. And that was, to put it vulgarly, that was going to be as Lincoln and Lee would become the two heroes of the Civil War. And that was how reconciliation was purchased. So the Civil War, we're not done with it. And maybe we never will be, but it is a gentler country. And I think that kind of social reform that kind of moral cultural reform, like the abolition movement, like the temperance movement, like women's suffrage. And America gets these things at intervals. The American conscience revives and demands change. And we may be living through that now. And some of it will be expressed through formal law, through changes in the procedures of Congress. But some of it may just be the way, you spend time with today's 20-somethings, that they are gentler people than their parents and grandparents were.
I think I'll just say quickly that it used to be we had these divisions. You could certainly tell them here in Ohio, other places where you were proud to be from the Union or you were proud to be from the Confederacy. And it really was a regional division based, if you're based upon which party you supported and ideology. And Fox and talk radio, other outlets, much people moving around, certainly much more sort of led to rural areas in the North becoming more like the South. But the opposite side of that coin is Atlanta and its suburbs, and New Orleans and its suburbs, and cities in Florida becoming more northern in terms of their views on issues like race. And I think for a while that we were, because the Electoral College and whatever, we were on the losing side of that. But I think what you're saying, which is important, is that those are the areas that are growing now. It's the Atlantas and their suburbs. It's the Tampa Bays and their suburbs. It's places the rural areas are shrinking. And I think maybe that has a lot to do with it. Yeah. The ending of the Southern kind of dominance, so to speak, culturally.
And so we're never finished building this country. And we're never finished building the democratic project, which now extends beyond the United States. And And that's maybe the next challenge is that we have to, and this is my old neocon hat, but the project of building a global democratic future, that still beckons. And Trump was a detour. And maybe now we can get back on the main highway.
Well, it's probably a good way of summing it up, isn't it?
Thank you, gentlemen. What a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks for being here, David. John, where are you?
Wait, I was muted, David. One quick thing.
Yeah.
Wait, I was going to ask you one thing, and I didn't realize I muted myself when I was coughing. I was going to say, as a Canadian, why the hell did you want to become an American? You're like the most pro-American guy I know. And for most of us, we look at Canada and kind of pine for it.
That's a whole lot.
Said, the niceness and that kind of, there's this image, and I realize it's stereotypical, but it's intriguing to me.
Yeah. Well, look, Canada,
but
this is a whole other discussion. Canada's had its history of political extremism too. Let's not forget that, especially at the provincial level. But I would say, I think being Canadian has influenced a lot of my reaction to Donald Trump. My life was shaped by the protection of the world system the United States built after World War II. And being a beneficiary of that, you see it more clearly, maybe, than the people who, were aware both of the costs as well as the benefits. And so when Donald Trump began attacking NATO and free trade and the transatlantic partnership, I mean, those, from a lot of people, those seemed like abstractions compared to him being, an insulting jerk and a racist and a bully and a misogynist. But for me, I mean, those are the fundaments of my life. Those are the things that made my life possible. And they are precious to me, and they were America's gift to the world after World War II, imperfectly, with lots of hypocrisies and gaps. But it was the system that was built after 1945 with its hypocrisies and gaps, I think is the greatest thing that the human race has ever done in terms of government. And
the culture that it created, a pro-democratic culture, one where we work together in various international institutions. I mean, absolutely, I would agree with that.
I quote in Trumpocalypse, I talk about, as I said, I've been obsessed with the history of West Germany after World War II. I quote Konrad Adenauer talking about how never in history had a victorious power reached out its hand to the defeated as the United States did to Germany after World War II. And again, with many hypocrisies and blind spots, and in a way that in 1955, people would question, are we really doing the right thing? From the perspective of today, we clearly did the right thing. And it's a better world. And it's a world I'm happy to live in. And it's a world that Donald Trump was determined to attack. And after he's gone, we can go back to restoring it, refurbishing it, making it new again.
All right, good.
Sounds like a plan.
Good answer.
All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you for the attention to the book. I'm really grateful to you.
No, that's great.
Of course.
Trumpocalypse, and available. You flash it and available everywhere.
Right.
And don't hold it upside down like the Bible.
Right.
Yeah.
Scary one, the reassuring one.
Trumpocracy and Trumpocalypse.
Read one when you wake up in the morning, the other before you go to sleep at night.
Exactly.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, David.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for being here.
Trying to see. There we go. Trying to see how to get rid of David. Remove. Yeah, I had muted myself for my cough, and then I was sitting here going.
Hey, honestly, I was like, I thought you ditched us. I was like, all right.
I was like, David, don't leave. I've got one last question. Anyway, very interesting as always.
Yeah.
I don't know what else. Yeah, I mean, I guess that I don't know. Whatever. I mean, I'm tired now.
I mean, the only thing I was going to talk about, David brought up, which is again, Trump tweeting out the conspiracy, that attacking the man, the 75-year-old man who was pushed over.
Right.
Just when nothing new. There's no floor. Whenever you think it can't get worse, it does.
And you saw. I don't know if you got to see the details. So the reporter at OAN, my onanism TV network, the far right network that's far to the right of Fox, that Trump now calls on that woman who always does the sycophantic questions at the
one that when Trump loses, he's going to try to buy and take over and brand as his own. Yes.
Yeah. So the reporter today who does the story that Trump is quoting, claiming the poor 75-year-old man that got pushed over by the cops, was it Buffalo, maybe?
Yes, it was Buffalo.
Full over, and then starts bleeding, and you're literally watching
from his ear.
From his ear, and if there's a small point too, if you look at the video, you see he's on the ground on his back, and he's like holding his phone in the air, or not in the air, but off, and all of a sudden you see the phone go down. Like he's totally lost any.
I thought he may have died when I watched it. I mean, it was horrible.
It's because you can see that he's lost all control of his body at that point. You think he died. Well,
when you fall, I'll just say quickly, you hit your head on the pavement, a full shot into the pavement falling back. You can easily die.
God.
Internal brain hemorrhage and internal bleeding. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So that story, I'm watching the story this morning. Then Matt Gertz, of course, who else but from Media Matters we've had on the show. Matt posts the video from OAN of the reporter talking about this that Trump got the whole story from. I'm hearing the reporter, and you listen to it. First of all, he sounds like one of those auto-generated Stephen Hawking voices. So you're kind of going, who is this guy talking like this? It sounds fake. Then I notice a Russian accent, and I'm thinking, no way. Well, Matt tweets, he's a Russian national working for OAN, and he also works for Sputnik, the Kremlin state.
No collusion. No collusion.
It is Sputnik, for those of you who don't know, is the English language anti-American Kremlin propaganda organ that is sole purpose to attack
not
the United States.
One of at least two that I know of.
Yes,
Sputnik is much more. Yeah, Sputnik and RT.
RT, Russia Today.
Sputnik in the past was more radio. Are they still just radio? I think
they do a lot of web too. Obviously, they do a lot of web too.
And RT is their video asset.
They went after me in 2016. I was like very proud. I was, woo!
Who? Which one?
Sputnik. They did a whole article about me. They were pissed. I forgot why. Probably something Hillary-ish or something. They were pissed.
They just sent me something asking me to be on the show, and I was like, I tried to decide if I'd answer. Sputnik. I was trying to decide if I'd answer by laughing at them or just, I just like, no, I handle it like a professional.
They're going to send you a virus next. Be careful.
Okay. I was like, no, I was like, I don't want to touch anything here. I just was like, no, thank you. Best of luck.
God, no, so that's the thing this is multiple level important. So Donald Trump took a bullshit story created by a Russian who works for the Kremlin Ministry of Propaganda. That's the first thing.
Yes.
And Donald Trump's favorite new news station
is the one that employs this person.
Is hiring people who work for the Russian government propaganda ministry. I mean, in the old days, this would have never happened. This would never happen in the old days. Republicans wouldn't hire people like this. Somebody with ties to the president would never hire people like this. And now it's totally...
And more so than that, if they even did it because they screwed up and didn't check the resume properly, the scandal would be enormous.
Yeah, imagine. And Trump, the scandal of Trump. Imagine, we always bring this up. Obama took a story that the Russians created, basically.
Even, take Obama out of it even, because so much of that was race. Clinton or Carter or any Democrat had done something of that nature. Like, that would be the Republican, what they would run on.
Yeah.
They'd have images of hammers and sickles and, literally that would be their campaign.
Yeah. It's literal incredible. Russian spoon-fed Donald Trump disinformation, and he broadcast it to 80 million Americans.
And that's why all the people, whether on the right or that contingent of crazy leftists, Mate and Greenwald and all that sit there and try to tell you what your eyes haven't seen, what they've seen, which is there was no conspiracy in terms of breaking a law that Mueller was able to prove.
Yep.
There was collusion up, out, and through the wazoo. And this is just another example of ways that they have found to work together, right out in public, in your face, to spread propaganda and try to reelect, in this case,
just so you know, your connection's awful again, just so you know. We can hear you.
Well, I'm down to 20% at this point on my phone, so it may be that
I don't know. My phone. It's just your voice. Yeah, actually, your voice sounds good, but your mouth is like not more. We're like doing.
Is it like one of those old kung fu movies where I'm like, I'm very happy.
It's hey, watch it. You're not gonna. You're gonna.
True. Is that racist?
Watch it.
I apologize, folks. It was more. I actually love those old kung fu movies too, but I guess I got to keep my mind about me that can be considered racist. I apologize.
Bad lip syncing would be my better example.
That's what I was going for. I wasn't going for the race of it. I was just going for the kung fu movies.
You're gonna lose your editorial job. Anything else? I'm just trying. I mean, we're done. We've got a good hour 20. I'm trying to think. Is there anything else big that we should hit on really quick before leaving?
I don't think so. Again, that was the only other thing I could think on. Think of the only other thing that might be worth mentioning is, there's a really interesting piece by was it Philip Bump, one of the ones in the Washington Post, just about how enduring and the lead is of Aaron Blake by Biden over, and Harry Enton did something too over Trump. It's just worth checking out the fact that this is people keep saying, oh, it's just like Hillary, and it's not. That his lead is larger. The bigger deal is that he is now, his average of all of his polls have him at 49.9%. Hillary, the thing is that she never got to 50. She never even got to 49. I think no poll ever had her above 48. There have been multiple polls that show Biden in the low to mid 50s.
And the state-by-state breakdown, I mean, in the key states is good.
As of this moment, knock on wood, it's incredible. I mean, so the only other point he brings up, Michigan poll, Epic, Detroit Free Press, Epic MRA poll had Biden up 12. And that's not in Michigan. I'm sorry, I should say that. And that's not the first poll to show double digits or high single digits in Michigan. And then when people brought up that there was a they got Michigan wrong, they did, but the average had Hillary up by 3 in Michigan, and she lost by less than a point. So they're off by 4.
If
they're off by 4 this time, Biden would still win by between 4 and 8 points.
Well, and it's still the margin of error if it was 3 points off, probably.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, doesn't mean anybody should get arrogant about this, and anybody should get sort of, shouldn't be out there doing everything possible to make sure this happens. But it's not the same thing as of this moment. It's a different thing.
Oh, good.
It's the only other thing I could see that is worth mentioning. I think that's about everything.
Excellent. All right. Today's what? Tuesday? Okay, so we're back later this week with a guest, maybe without a guest. And since we're finally comfortable enough with this Zoom thing, I'm thinking next week maybe we set one up in advance and we let the subscribers know.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I think we should probably let them know.
And then, but that way we can do something where people come and join us, and we can't have a free-for-all talking, but maybe people can even submit questions, or I don't know. Even if we get a couple people, it would be fun, But with people being at home, I still want to try it before everyone goes back to work because we have a better chance of people actually being available. So it'll be fun.
Sounds like a plan, John.
And then I can be trying to deal with ads and getting questions from the chat box. Ooh la la.
Sorry, that's what the price John pays for being the technically talented one of the two of us.
Exactly. All right, then. Thanks, guys. This has been fun. Thanks, Cliff.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Thank you, John.